Welcome. You listen to 360 Info. I'm your host, Hamtonio. To manipulate history is to manipulate consciousness. And to manipulate consciousness is to manipulate possibilities. And to manipulate possibilities is to manipulate power. Welcome to the show, you guys. Glad to be back with you guys. I had whoo, a heck of a weekend last week. We had the parade and festival downtown Cleveland. Uh, they tried to rain on our parade. We got most of it off, and some people got afraid of the rain coming, but it turned out all right. The second half of our program, our festival, Carlos Jones and Earl the Pearl and the Hugh People and Tam Magic, they all performed. They're right there on Mall C. So it was a great time, and we're looking forward to next year. We got a great show for you today. I'm not going to talk too much about it because our good brother uh Dr. Gallman, he got always got some things to do on Saturday morning, so we don't want to hold him up too much. But we got a great show for you today. It's going to be interesting, and I think it's a topic that we need to talk about and really internalize it as people, so we know what we're dealing with and knowing how I guess to level out a certain state of consciousness that we need to have in order to make good on good health, move forward with good health, because we have some serious disparities in dealing with health in this country. And I think we have to have the right mental capacity and understanding in order for us to navigate through some of the trials and tribulations and some of the problems that we have as far as our health is concerned, and how it all tied together. So we're gonna get into a nice deep conversation about racism and the health and disparities, and how we should be moving forward with this whole thing about health, because it's very important. You can't do nothing without your health. In the remote studio, we got Brother Vince. What's going on, Brother Vince?
Just got to do a quick commercial before we bring Dr. Gallman aboard. Just want to let everyone know about the one-person show that I'm doing in the Border Light Festival on July 25th, 26th, and 27th. You can go to borderlightcle.org to get your tickets. Look for the box office and just put the title of the show, Unmasked, Navigating a New World Order, in that search window, and it will take you to where you can purchase your tickets for this event. I'm going to be doing a tribute to Winston Willis, who many of you may know is the black millionaire who had his empire stolen from him, and he's still alive. He's actually in a nursing home over in Fairfax right now, and he's still committed to getting back what he had before. The likelihood of that is slim to none, but he does deserve justice. So don't forget July 25th, 26th, and 27th at Playhouse Square. You can go to borderlightcle.org, and I'll put that information up before the show ends. Also, want to let you know that I'm going to be doing a concert with the jazz poets at the Garfield Heights Civic Center next Saturday at noon. We will be performing as a group, and we're going to welcome the mayor of Garfield Heights, Mr. Matthew Burke, to open the show for us. So that's what's on tap for the coming week. Also, on the 14th of this month, which is next Sunday, we're going to be doing jazz, poetry, and an art exhibition at Larchmere Art. So welcome aboard for that. We'll give you more information on the 360 Info Network Facebook page. With that, I'd like to welcome to our program Dr. Burnett Quadwo Gallman. He's a graduate of Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina, and the Hahnemann Medical College, which is now Drexel University College of Medicine. As a physician, he's focused on health and well-being of all humanity. He researches the causes of health disparities so that they can be eliminated and optimal health can be achieved. As an historian, he studied, taught, lectured, and written on topics as varied as ancient Kemetic history and culture, West African history, and the history and culture of Africans from the United States of America. Then that's AUSA for those who are interested. As a genealogist, he's researched his paternal family history to 18th century Angola. And as a race man, he has studied, lectured, written on such varied topics as agnotology, epigenetics, and scientific racism, also known as eugenics, as they relate to African people. So with all of that said, welcome to 360 Info Network. He's getting over a cold, so we're going to bear with him, and and wish him a speedy recovery. But welcome to 360 Info Network, Dr. Burnett Quadwo Gallman.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and I always enjoy conversing with you, brothers. Try to see if we can save the world.
Yeah, Doc. I figure, well, you know, it's always good, to have platforms like this to where we can, talk about some things that, most of our people, don't get on regular mainstream, and you always, if you don't understand that you're getting a tainted version of pretty much most information that you are acquiring right now, you know, uh, uh, you're looking at things from a viewpoint of a Eurocentric ideology, and you have to understand that. So I know every time, and Doc, you might can relate to this as well. Every time I was, went to classes for anything or was taught certain things, I always had to take it back to my own community, and modify it to where it made some sense for me and mine, as far as my physiology, our consciousness, my community, whatever you had to modify because you was getting things from a Eurocentric point of view. So you brought up a topic that I thought that was interesting that we're going to discuss today and get into it. You talked about racism and black health, and you said you made a statement of saying being hated to death. You know, hated to death. Now, we tend to think that we are separate from everything and things don't affect us and, I'm control of it. But on how the universe is made and how the creation is all around us and we all connected, they talk about in entanglement and things like that. How these subtleties and how these little things affect our health, doc? Because I know when we talk about health disparities and racism, we tend generally think about the normal things as far as diet or not having access to certain things, health clinics and stuff around in our communities. Doc, let's talk about that. Let's get into that. How you speak on talking about getting hated to death. what exactly where you're going with that?
Yeah, let me say before I say that, get into that. You mentioned something that triggered by using the term Eurocentric.
Mm,
What's very interesting to me is that in another bit of research that I've done, I'm convinced that we have been sucked, kidnapped into a culture that is sick. The,
mm,
and when we look at the definitions the Eurocentric definitions that they give for illnesses, and words like psychopathic or narcissistic, malignant narcissism, I think that that is what's happening. So that we have been put into, and interesting. I think that it's important, at least to me, that we as African people look at what does we mean, what is they, what is we, and I think that from the purposes of what we're talking about now, when I use the word we in the statement, we are being hated to death, I'm thinking about people of African origin
mhm,
or people that many scholars have defined as the other. And the fact is that that hatred creates behavioral patterns that impact us, that actually the that stimulate certain reactions and pathways that not only create mental illnesses. Um, as we were talking before, we went live. the suicide rate for Black people in general and Black children in particular has almost, I'm guessing, has close to quadrupled since the 1950s. In the 1950s, it was almost unheard of to hear about anyone Black committing suicide. Now it's not. Um, and I blame the seduction of a narcissistic society in which we get involved in the illusion of inclusion, where we lose the definition of what we really is, and we start to see ourselves as part of this so-called greater whole, which is really, really sick. If you look at what Western society, Western so-called civilization has done over time, it is horrendous. Um, Before they even started messing with us, what they did to each other. So uh, the stress that results from the effects of racism, and it doesn't have to be overt racism. First of all, there are many different types of racism, um, and what I'm going to concentrate on is now a term that many people hear fairly frequently called microaggressions. And the microaggressions are just actions, statements that are, and that may or may not be intended to insult you. But you kind of, most of the time, we kind of let it pass, but it has effects on us and it creates stress. In the medical community, the cumulative effects of stress is called allostatic load. You know, as I think we've talked about before, every profession, every job has its own language, and medicine is no different. So instead of saying the overall effects of stress, we say allostatic load. Uh, uh, okay, I'll take that. That's what we got to work with. But I think that this increased allostatic load in and of itself creates physical changes in our bodies that create illnesses and significantly alters not only our health status but also our length of life. Um, what's interesting is that, again, as we said earlier, a lot of people are not surprised to hear that Black folk have a lot of stress. Black folk have a lot of anxiety. We have a lot of depression. Well, again, those are some things um, that happen, but there are physiologic, anatomical things that happen in our bodies as a result of this stress load. Um, as we were talking about, there's a book, and I have to admit that I have not read the book cover to cover. I've used it as reference, through looking up indexing things. But the name of the book is called Weathering. This white female, I think she's Jewish, female researcher wrote a book called Weathering. And she defines weathering as the same as what we just talked about with allostatic load, which is the cumulative effect of stress on the body. And she says that people who are living in an unjust society uh, experience higher levels of stress and they affect the body even more, which contributes to a lot of the illnesses that are so frequent among people of African origin, like hypertension, diabetes, and that type thing. Um, Discrimination in and of itself, uh, and I'm going to get a little technical here, even though um, I'm we all are familiar with the DNA strands. And at the end of a chromosome, you have a little cap. Think like a shoelace, for instance. At the end of a shoelace, you have like a little cap, and that's called a telomere. And what stress can do is shorten that telomere. Now, the telomere, in and of itself, functions as an indicator of health. Um, as the telomere shortens, we become more. Uh, um, it
Wrong.
becomes easier for us
Hmm.
to to develop these illnesses, and
Hmm.
actually, even it can directly shorten our lives. Um, Stress can contribute to calcification of blood vessels, especially the blood vessels in the heart, so that we develop
Hmm.
heart attacks and strokes and that
Hmm.
type of thing. So there are a lot of different physiological things that happen to us as a result of the stress that we suffer from discrimination and racism. So in saying that, that's what I mean. We're being hated to death. I think the life expectancy of black folk in America today is 5 years shorter than white folk. And I personally have a little bit of a problem with the term disparities, even though that's what we have to work with. Only because when we talk about disparities, we're comparing our health to white folk health.
Hmm.
And I think that that is probably a low level aspiration. I think we should aspire for optimal health.
Okay. Okay. Hey, Doc.
Yeah.
You know what? Um, I want to take this thing into uh, something really deep in dealing with our body and dealing with health, because when you're saying that, it takes me back to the Japanese doctor Emoto, I believe I'm saying it right, something like that, who did the experiment with water, and he talked about the water and how different negative energies or even negative thoughts can cause uh, issues to the body. And we talk, when we talk about Eastern philosophy, we talk about emotions and how emotions of, like anger sets in the liver and fear sets in the kidneys and things like that. What I want to just briefly talk about and zero in our audience too is about how this how deep this thing is that we're talking about, because all these subtleties that you talked about, and how it resonates into your subconscious mind, and you're operating with that, and you use the term, one of those terms, of how it just builds up and builds up and builds up, and this stress and these little subtleties, and these feelings of inferior, that you constantly being hit with all the time, and people spewing out negative derogatory things, going how that affects the body. You know what I mean? And then your state of mind. And then on top of that, let's think about all the negative imagery that tends to just sit there and resonate and take house in your mind on a daily. So if words with Dr. Emoto, he wrote something negative on a valve of water, and it destroyed the water molecule. So can we imagine how then this carrying on this negative self-hate type of stuff, because you might not even know it subconsciously is resided in you like that, and how it's affecting the body totally. So, and why is it important for us to, what's our pressure release valve there? What do we need to be doing, and to first recognize it, and maybe even circumvent that, on how deep this whole thing is connected. It's just we need to know the spiritual ramification of this thing called life and existence. We need to understand this connection.
You hit on a lot of different things, bro.
Mm-hmm.
I think that first, we are products of our environment, and we're products of our education, and we're products of our socialization. Our education is anti African,
Mm.
our socialization is anti African. As I said earlier, I think that too many people of African origin, when they hear the word we, they think of themselves as a greater uh, group of, now I won't say greater, as a larger group of people called Americans. And we've been seduced into believing that, even though I can point to really nothing in our history that would qualify us as American other than dying in the wars to defend America. Now, I may be being naive at this point, but that's where I am at this point.
Mhm.
Now, to the second part of your question, I think that there are ways of preventing and treating ourselves. Now, it's interesting. One of the things that some of the young people here in Columbia have criticized us old heads. They're saying we are pointing out the problem. We need to look up solutions. We need to get solutions. And one of the one of the kick clapbacks that I use, and it's not really a clapback, it's more of an answer. I think that there are a lot of people that want to do something, but they don't have a basis of knowledge to make what they do effective, or have a base of knowledge to know exactly what to do. Now, in this case, I think that knowledge of self is not only prophylactic, but it's also therapeutic. Um, we think back to some of the temples in Kemet and remember that one of the things that our ancestors used to tell us all the time is know thyself. And that was more than just advice, because in the, as Dr. Carruthers used to say, if we consider this mess we find ourselves in right now, one of the ways out of the mess is to know ourselves. And the only way of doing that is to study our history and culture. It's not just an intellectual exercise,
Mm.
because by
Right.
studying our history and our culture, we develop a much better self image, positive self uh, introspective way. And that has been shown in quite a few studies to be helpful. A positive self image can cure or prevent many of the illnesses that we talked about.
Mm.
Um, Now, we look at the nefarious aspect of that, and back to at the top of the show when we said we're being hated to get to death.
Mhm.
I don't think it's an accident. I think that a lot of this information that we're now uncovering has been known for a while. I think that this has been a very subtle form of intentional genocide.
Mhm.
So, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that's just my belief.
Well,
And there's nothing in my study of the history
mhm.
of our enemies
Mhm.
that makes me change, that would make me change that, because
Mm.
because of their history. I think a very, very brilliant psychologist once said that uh, you don't evaluate a people based on studying psychological theories. If you want to know the psychology of a people, look at their history, and that'll tell you all you need to know.
Mm.
So, uh, right now, one of the things that I'm doing is trying to promote the idea that uh, Studying history is not elitist. Studying history is not purely intellectual. Studying history is not for self aggrandizement. Studying history is essential for our survival.
Mhm.
Dr. John Henry Clark said that we need to indulge in the essential selfishness of survival. And I think what he was referring to was the fact that our enemies have survived based on their narcissism, although their narcissism went to a pathologic degree. Whereas if we just love ourselves enough to know who we are, I think that our telomeres will remain stable, our cortisol levels will be more regulated, and I think we'd be less obese. We'd have less diabetes. We'd have less hypertension. We'd have less kidney failure. We'd have less uh, hypertensive heart disease, and so forth and so on. Um, and I know I had this conversation with some of my brothers. I think I may have mentioned it. There's a group of us brothers that have been having a meal together a week, and we're not doing it today, but that brunch, we call it the brotherhood brunch, even though sisters are invited, but that brotherhood brunch is kind of a lifeline for all of us. And we get a chance, each of us is active in our own different way, and we get a chance to bounce ideas off each other. And sometimes we can be harsh, but then it comes from love because we've been doing this for more than 30 years. So
Mhm.
we know and love each other. And I am anxious to continue to bounce this idea that we're talking about now,
Mhm.
uh, because one of the brothers is actually the priest of our Kemetic temple. Another of the brothers is actually a psychiatrist. Another of the brothers is a psychologist. Another one is a retired college professor. We have another priest and so and so forth and so on. We have several younger brothers that are activists, and I think it's very important that we understand that. And there's no simple way, YouTube scholars are not going to be able to learn enough. You got to read. You got to read,
Yeah.
and it I I don't understand anyone who doesn't know how to who doesn't like to read because I've always been a bookworm, and I get very dismayed when I hear people say I don't like to read. Um, it just bothers me.
Mhm.
So, and the fact is that what I try to impart is that most of the people who are on YouTube, if they're saying something, they had to read to know it. Of course, now you have a lot of folk on social media that come off half cocked that read two and a half books and they want to get on and talk trash. And it's interesting because when whenever I have given back in the day when I used to do a lot of lectures and people would ask me for references and bibliographies, I had prepared a 4-page list of books that I think are essential that you start with.
Start.
And that you start with, yeah. And it is the reactions. And I wasn't being funny. I wasn't being sarcastic or anything because I really believe that.
Mhm.
And I've narrowed it down now to about maybe 25 books that I think are essential to start with. But and it changes because um, people are the research that's going on now is awesome. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the regrets, if if I could say that I have for growing old, is the fact that I won't be able to read all those books.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I love to seek knowledge, and so I think it's very, very important that we re-emphasize the importance of our history. Carter G. Woodson was on to something. Du Bois was on to something. Anna Julia Cooper was on to something. So I think that we need to, and we can't depend on our enemies to allow us to teach our history.
Come on now. Mm-hmm.
Um, because basically what they consider Black history is our contribution to their civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And we really have to look at what we did for us and how the world has changed since we were defeated.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think those are some very, very, very unfortunate things, but I think they're necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to 360 Info Network right here on AM 1490 WERE. We are also simulcasting to our Facebook page, which is 360 Info Network. And we are also on YouTube on my channel and Hamtonio's channel, The Journey with Hamtonio. We invite you to join us on our online platforms. Subscribe, like, and comment, and it helps us tremendously in our effort to bring you good content and good information. We are interviewing Dr. Burnett Quadwell Gallman right now. He is a historian and physician. He's very steeped in the tradition and knowledge of African history. Dr. Gallman, I want to ask you, in light of the fact that you brought up the idea of knowledge of self, and hearing you talk about being steeped in the tradition of Kemet and those ideas, looking back at the 42 confessions of freedom from sin, and looking at the idea, as I've been told, that people during that time in history looked upon themselves as gods. And then we had a paradigm shift that occurred in 325 AD, and the emphasis changed. And so it was only one human being on the planet could be considered God, and everybody else was something else. The idea of us existing as gods and being able to go through 42 declarations of freedom from sin every day, as I understand it, enabled us to embody the idea of existence as gods. But when we have those conversations today, it's seen as blasphemy, and as a result, we don't have a knowledge of ourself. I'm also reminded of a saying, physician, heal thyself. But when something happens with us, we go to another physician to tell us what's wrong with us because we don't know ourselves. My position is to know ourselves is to know God, because self represents, as I understand it through the Kemetic ideology, self represents God, and the not self represents something other than that, perhaps our human side, our emotional side, and so forth and so on. So I wanted to get your thoughts about that. And then I also wanted to talk to you because you mentioned the suicide rate, and I guess basically obesity and dysfunction in our society, and stress as it relates to that. But you also have studied epigenetics, and there's this idea that we carry the trauma of those who came before us within us, and then the relationship of that to toxicity, in that we don't, or we're not intentional about eliminating toxins from our bodies, and that affects us on a cellular level. So we keep all the toxins stored in ourselves, we don't get rid of it, and then we deal with disease, dysfunction, suicidal thoughts, some of which are brought about through pharmaceuticals that are used to treat our emotional issues. So I know I uncovered a lot there, But
Yeah, I'm trying to write it down.
but I've been listening, and just it promulgates thoughts when I hear you talk about certain things. So the epigenetic piece, and also the idea that we as beings can experience life as a divine being as well as being a human being.
Well, getting back to the early part of your question, one of the things that in our temple we have looked at, you know, the Egyptologists call those 42 the negative confessions. And the fact is that what that says is that they're coming from a place in which there is no expectation of of good thought, good speech, or good action. So, in order to get through, you have to confess that you didn't do those things. Whereas in Kemet, whereas I wouldn't say necessarily that they thought of themselves as gods, because they certainly respected natures who were the aspects of gods, and they tried to emulate those natures. Um, we call those 42 affirmations of innocence because they're just affirming that they did what was expected of them rather than confessing that they didn't do those things that were
That's
negatively.
your point. That's your point. Okay.
And so those affirmations of innocence, and it's interesting because
hmm
you
hmm
mentioned how we get uh, accused of so many things when we talk about that. Folks, um, the let me say this. Many years ago, the Methodist ministers in before the Methodist Church became United Methodist, when it was still Black and White Methodist, the Black Methodists used to have a retreat at Claflin University in Orangeburg, which is an HBCU, and they would have various people come in and talk to them. And one year they asked me to come in and talk on two things. I talked about the African origin of religion, and I also talked about some African religions. Obviously, I couldn't speak on all of them but I spoke on the ones that I knew about. And I was there from Saturday until Tuesday. And I think I gave 3 lectures a day on those two topics. And it was amazing to me the number of ministers that came to me to tell me that they had studied that and they knew a lot of that information, but they had forgotten it and was happy to hear it again. And I never forget, there's this one minister who I grew up around, and he was kind of like my father died when I was 14 years old, and several men in the community enveloped me and took me into under their wings and helped me develop into what you're seeing now. Even though one in particular never came around to African centered thought, but they taught me manhood. And this particular minister was one of those men who had, they made sure that I got jobs. They taught me responsibility, that type thing. So when he came up and told me he was proud of me and he really enjoyed my words, and I, my chest was just out there. I was just, I got his approval. And then he said, I learned a lot of this information in seminary. And I said, well, I got to come visit your church because I want to hear this. He said, "Oh, I can't preach this. I can't preach this." He said, "The people aren't ready for it." He said, "And plus, um, even though I don't need the job, he was by that time he was retired from another job." He said, "But the people aren't ready. I can't preach that." And that particular sentiment was echoed several times over the next several years by several other ministers. So I guess I'm kind of hard on ministers because if you know the truth and you withhold the truth, what does that make you? Um, oh, I got off on a tangent. I'm sorry. With regard to the epigenetics piece, um, that is the other piece of this, and it's still there have been. I think at this point, I think there are three biological mechanisms that are suspected of transmitting this information. Um, Interestingly, the study started with people wanting to see why the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were doing so badly mentally. And early on, I never will forget, there was a book that was published that a very good friend of mine he's now an ancestor, but he was part of our brotherhood, who was not only a psychologist, but he was one of those ministers that I do respect because he told the truth. And he recommended this book, and I looked the book up. The book cost $300 or $400, I forget which. But on his recommendation, I saved up and I bought the book. And it was an early compendium of the research up to that point of on what we now call epigenetics. And but it was hidden because how many people are going to pay $300 or $400 for a book? Actually, how many people are going to pay $25 for a book? When it comes down to it, with the way that anti-intellectualism has been being spread. So epigenetics, and I think that DeGruy hits on that pretty in a social perspective also in her post-traumatic slave syndrome. Um, I'm just waiting. I just actually, to be perfectly honest with you, I just pulled an article that that is a review of the literature about epigenetics to this point. I have not had a chance to read it yet. Um, it's in my book bag. I carry it around with me, and I think that that is something that is going to be very, very important for us in in our, and I think, I hate to sound negative, but in our futile attempt to get reparations, um, because the fact is it doesn't matter how much how we prove what we prove, uh, how well we present our case, they ain't gonna do it
They
because
ain't gonna do it, man.
you know what. Well, they said you don't expect some people to do right because they ain't got no do right in them.
It might be almost like, Doc, okay, we was wrong. Now what? So what, huh? Is that what you saying? What is that
Pretty
gonna
much.
change?
If they even say we were wrong, they
Uh,
might just say, "So what?"
so what?
Well, it's interesting here in Cleveland, they declared racism as a public health crisis. So a few years ago, we had something called a pandemic.
Hmm.
Pandemic was a public health crisis,
Hmm.
and they recognized it as a public health crisis. And then they came up with all kinds of money. We still spending the money that they came up to address the pandemic. But when you look at racism as a public health crisis that existed before and after, we got amnesia about our ability to create resources to address that. So, to your point about reparations, it's a futile effort because there is no intention, absolutely no intention of providing reparations. They,
And with regard to racism being a public health crisis, that has been an argument in public health for quite a few years. And as a matter of fact, maybe 25 years ago, I read an article where there was a professor who proposed making racism a mental illness. Now, the problem with making racism a mental illness is that somebody can get out there and kill a lot of black folk and then claim insanity and get off.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's a mental illness. I think it's a mental disorder. But at the same time, I think it's based in psychopathic personalities and malignant narcissism. And it's not just individual, it's cultural. It's not just individual, it's cultural. So we actually live in a psychopathic, narcissistic culture, and we are the targets. Um, uh, Dr. Francis Chris Welsing said that they're afraid of us. And I've never disagreed with her because she actually formed the kernel of some of my early thoughts. Um, but I think that that fear is not just for genetic survival. I think that fear uh, is even broader.
Mhm. Is it good with Doc? Would you say that it's just all? If we talking about a genetic DNA situation, is that the fear of extinction? I mean, because I don't know. I guess that may be something that a person would have to go through if they know that number one, you're holding on to all this power, you don't stole all this power, you don't rob the planet of everything, and you sitting here only 12 or so percent of the world's population, and you holding on to this self-proclaimed this power per se of controlling and manipulating the planet. Where does your state of consciousness go with that? Are you always like the fastest gun? Where people are going to be coming to try you out all the time. Does that bring that where they have to weaponize everything that they come across? They got to see how it can every new invention or every research and development got to be transformed into a weapon being weaponized by something, even down to the food or whatever, the air, the sound, the water. Does it brings that state of consciousness? And in closing with that thought, what does that do to your body? You know,
You know, you're right. This whole idea of competition,
mm-hmm,
I think, is a product of Western civilization, um, because what is the other side of competition is cooperation. If we human beings, that's the we, if we human beings were able to cooperate rather than compete, where would the world be? Where would the world be? And getting into your point, we talk about the epigenetic effect of our stress from generation to generation, but we can't forget the epigenetic passage of racism by our enemies,
Hmm. Hmm.
and because that goes both ways.
Hmm.
Um, I saw someone mention eugenics, and eugenics, we're I think that's very, very important, because what is happening very subtly now, if anyone understands anything about eugenics, which was a pseudoscience, it's a false science that tries to put humanity on different levels, different a hierarchy of intelligence and so forth. But the principles of eugenics are sneaking back into the public discourse, and actually are being championed in other in hidden language by a lot of the people. This Project 2025 that everyone talks about so much is a eugenic document. I've not read the whole thing, but it's a document based on eugenics. And in this case, though, people forget that the prominent eugenicists, Davenport and those guys, the prominent eugenicists actually put Europeans in different levels. Northern and Western Europeans were believed to be superior to Southern and Eastern Europeans, who were superior to Asians, who were superior to Native Americans, who were superior to Africans. We were always on the bottom. So I think that it's a good thing for people to understand eugenics, so that you can see where a lot of these folks are coming from.
And they also is very important for us to understand epigenetics. You know what I'm saying? So they can understand some of the problems that we might be transferring on, and how we go about fixing that.
And again, knowledge of self, our history, our culture, who we really are, is important to epigenetically pass on to our youth. Um, you know, I have been criticized by some people in saying that we magnify Africa, we put Africa on a pedestal, and the fact is that the answer to that is yes and no. But what we have to understand is we need to understand who we are from where we came from, so that we won't make those same mistakes. And my friends who are continental Africans frequently don't realize just what a job colonialism did to their mentalities. Um, I'm a member of a Pan African organization here called the Organization of African Unity. As a matter of fact, I currently serve as the chairman of the board, and my president is a young Nigerian brother. And and one of the board members is a Ghanaian, and another. Well, we have about 16 to 18 different African countries, plus Jamaica, Haiti, and Trinidad represented in our organization. But and as well as IUSA, as well as IUSA. But what I perceive is that many of them do mean well, but they are conceptually incarcerated by what they were taught by their colonial masters. Much the same as we're trying to break away with what we were taught by our enslavers, our kidnappers and enslavers. It's just a matter of where we are. You know, obviously nobody knows everything. I don't claim to be all of that smart. I don't claim to be brilliant, but I do know that because of the work that I put in over the years, I'm probably a little more advanced than somebody in knowledge, at least, and somebody who's just starting to read. Um, and you know, the teachings of Ptahhotep tells me the very first precept, and I advise everybody to get that book. It's called The Teachings of Ptahhotep, translated by Asa Hilliard, Nia Damali, and Obadeli Williams. And the very first precept is, do not be proud and arrogant in your knowledge, because wisdom can be found anywhere.
Wow.
And I think that is extremely important, because you have some folk that read 10, 15 books and they become experts and they lord that over you. And the fact is that we're all in this. We got to help each other. It's about cooperation, not competition. Otherwise, we defeat ourselves before we even start to work for ourselves.
That is probably a good place for us to button things up right now, as we are running out of time. But we'd like to thank you, Dr. Gallman, for appearing with us on 360 Info Network. And we look forward to your return so that we can have more elevated conversations about genetics and history and knowing thyself, as it is so important. We've got about 30 seconds, Brother Antonio, so we have just enough time to let the folks know that our engineer, Tone Harley, is doing a bang-up job of making these broadcasts possible. We really appreciate what he's able to do for us, and we appreciate you for tuning in as you do on Saturday morning. So as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your absolute best day. Peace.
Peace.
Peace. Hotep.
Hotep.
All right.
Okay,
so that ends the terrestrial broadcast. And again, thanks for joining us. Looking forward to more greater conversations, Dr. Gallman, and may you have a speedy recovery, man. I know that mucus is wreaking havoc on.
Yes, it is. And I got to get out of this 110-degree weather.
Okay.
Oh, wow. 110. Oh, my goodness.
That's the heat index today.
Wow.
110.
Yeah. Well, appreciate you, Doc. We'll be talking then.
All right. You all take care.
You
okay,
too.
Doc.
Oh,
all
do
right.
me a favor. If the two of you can send me your snail mail addresses. Okay.
Will do. Will do.